Good evening. Captain Matt Edwards, retired here, with the next Facebook Live observation post broadcast. I'm not feeling the best today. I have half a mind to cancel it and do it some other time. Excuse me, but here I am. So I'm going to try to get through it fairly quickly, hopefully. So as usual, I post it to my group observation posts where I post what I observe, just the facts. So the fall 2006 Auditor General of Canada's report, why did the RCMP have serious concerns about their long-term disability program? Now, I've talked about this many times, but basically the Great West Life policy that the RCMP has, that's almost the same as the military's Manulife Service Income Support Insurance Plan, Policy 901-102. And the way I see it is that these are both what you call administrative services only policies. Now, that means the employer, for lack of a better word, Canada, they hired a company to administer the programs, but they self-insure. The government has a policy of self-insurance. Military vehicles, RCMP cruisers, government doesn't buy commercial insurance. It has a policy to self-insure. Now, the thing about it is the RCMP superintendent went on the record and he said that they weren't sure if they had the authority to sell insurance. That's because insurance is provincially a provincial responsibility under the Constitution. Section 9213, I believe, property and civil rights, that resides in the provinces. Point number 2 I put there. Is it perjury to claim that you are the party that must be sued when in fact the real party is someone else? Manulife, for example, does not underwrite the SISIP Policy 901-102, but it insists that it is the insurer. Now, that's what I was saying in the first point. These people go on the record as being the insurer, but they don't take any financial risks. What we ought to do is find out what the financial details are between the government and these companies. Like how much do they pay and what services do they get in return for the money. In fact, it was mentioned in the 2006 Fall Auditor General's report on the RCMP. It mentioned that the Great West Life gets paid a certain percentage of the on a per claim basis. So I assume that it's the same way for the Manulife policy. Point number 3 is the CFO, Canadian Forces Ombudsman, my own abbreviation. I don't think I've seen anybody else use that. And the OVO, the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman, that's commonly used, considered a check and balance in a democracy, in our democracy. Not in my mind, as they are part of the government's executive branch. Now, the thing is with a democracy is you're supposed to have checks and balances. Democracy is made up of 3 different branches. You have the legislators, who we elect. Then you have the executive, and they are the ones who do things for the government. And then you have the judiciary, the judges. So each one is supposed to be watched by the other 2 to make sure that they don't get too powerful. So the thing is the government came up with this idea to have an ombudsman. Now, they set up a toothless organization to make it appear that they were actually caring about things and they wanted to put in a check and a balance, but they didn't put any authority in these organizations to actually change things. So if the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman or the Canadian Forces Ombudsman sees something going wrong, they can't order a fix. So I have no faith at all when the government decides to deceive people into thinking that the ombudsman matters. Okay? To me, they're a waste of money. So I think there's a $5 million budget each one has, but that could be $10 million spent on other things that actually might have value. Now, the Public Service Superannuation Act, leave without pay buyback, for me. How much did I pay to secure a higher pension? Was it worth it? Then I answer it for myself, no. Sun Life claws back the additional pension, but Sun Life is really the Public Service Superannuation Act clawing back because of itself. So here's what happens. Unlike the military, the public service has a period of leave without pay where you're on the books as an employee, but you don't perform active services. So you don't get paid, and you don't pay into a pension. Now, when it comes to if you have to medically retire, for example, they offer you the option of buying back your time. So then you have to pay both the employer and the employee's contribution, and I had 3 years of leave without pay, so that's 3 times 2%. So I had a 6% higher Public Service Superannuation Act pension, which most people would do. I never thought about the fact that I was getting Sun Life insurance, and I still am. Because I had a higher Public Service Superannuation Act pension, because I bought back my leave without pay, I never got anything for the money I spent in buying back my time. Now, this is surely wrong. It would be called inequitable. All right? You cannot have someone, pay for something, but not get value from it. So I plan on trying to shake things up by, getting the government to look into this and try to fix it. I plan on talking to my member of parliament about it, because I'm sure that there are other public servants who buy back their time and they don't realize any, basically, profit from buying back their time. It's not a thing for military members because there's no leave without pay. You have to be terminated from the military according to the SISIP policy, or you can't get the long-term disability insurance. Now, the next one. Who directs the Sun Life and the Public Service Management Insurance Plan? I think it's the National Joint Council, NJC, but SISIP has its own board. At least it used to have a board of directors, a board of management, and whatever you want to call it. The National Joint Council has, I know from researching this in the past, they have 4 employee members and 4 union members on the board of management. And then they have 1 chairman. I think it's appointed by the management employer. But maybe they swap it and they have, sometimes it's employer, sometimes it's employee/union. Maybe they switch it every now and then. But my point is that you always hear about these plans, SISIP, Great West Life, Manulife, and the, Public Service Management Insurance Plan. The government always refers to them, and I think everybody seems to refer to them as Treasury Board sponsored. Now, many insurance companies have administrative service only policies that the employer actually insures the employee, and basically they're the sponsor of the insurance policy. But they're not the insurance company that administers it for the employer. They're not the underwriter. See? They don't take the risk of property loss. So it comes down to a matter of trust. Like in the Manouche case, the government of Canada got sued, Her Majesty the Queen, and that was proper because, they were the ones who underwrote the policy. But in the Sun Life versus Ryan case, in the Gibson versus Sun Life case in 1984, the Sun Life versus Ryan one, as Nova Scotia Supreme Superior Court, 2003, it was the insurance companies that got sued and not the government. See? So these employer-sponsored long-term disability plans, basically you have the employer, the insurance is the one who underwrites the insurance, and then you have the agent. So the government, the employer, is the principal. Principal. Now, I think anyway. So then the agent is the one, like an employee, who gets hired, who gets paid to do the insurers, the underwriters, bidding. So basically whatever Manulife does, they're acting for the government in this insurance policy. They probably have their own policies where they, underwrite and administer their own policies. But for the SISIP policy 901-102 and the Sun Life policy 12,500G, that's two examples of administrative services only policies, and these two companies are not acting in their own interest. They're not trying to make a profit on the insurance. They're basically getting paid on a piece basis. I mean, whatever the deal is with the government, that's the way it works. Now, okay, to bring a couple of legalities in. Under the Financial Administration Act, Section 7, brackets 1, 2, 1, first is 1. The government gives itself the authority to create benefit programs, right? Like the public service health care, the public service dental care, the Great West Life policy, the Sun Life policy, the SISIP policy. All these things are considered benefits. Now, under Section 7.12 of the Financial Administration Act, it says that once these programs are created, the Financial Administration Act does not apply anymore. So basically, they can set up programs, but they can't control them because, well, that's the way it works. You're supposed to be a benefit for the employee, and it's not supposed to be run by the employer who has different interests than the employee. Now, in a perfect world, you'd have a trustee, say, that runs it on a fiduciary basis for the people who the benefit is supposed to benefit. But the government has it in its head that it owns the policy, that it should be the one who gets a profit or loss, and when you have a clawback, for example, the government said after the Manulife case was over that the government terminated the Pension Act clawback from the SISIP policy. Now, I didn't make it one of my main points, but let me explain something to people about the SISIP class action. It wasn't the Pension Act that was being taken. The Pension Act was the cat's paw, the reason for the long-term disability insurance reducing its payment or eliminating its payment. So the Department of National Defense reduced its payment because of a Veterans Affairs Canada payment. That's what happened. But the thing is that you're not supposed to, under the common law, reduce one thing because of another when the compensation that's being made to make you whole is supposed to be paid in addition to the insurance you bought, because that's a non-indemnity payment, but the Pension Act is an indemnity payment, and they are not the same. So you have one that's bought in contract, you have one that's paid based on the amount of injury you have, and basically they're different things, apples and oranges, chalk and cheese, oil and water. Now, interestingly, at least it is to me sometimes, the government then flipped it around, and now the Veterans Affairs people, they take everything into account instead of the Department of National Defense taking things into account. So under the old system, you had the Pension Act, which was being used as the cat's paw and reduced D&D's payment. Now you have SISIP and the Canadian Forces Pension and the Canada Pension Plan being used to reduce the liability of Veterans Affairs Canada. That's absurd. That's fucking crazy. You should not be allowed to reduce the amount of compensation being made to someone injured in military service based on their own private savings and insurance and pensions. It's not how it's supposed to work. The person who injures you is supposed to make you whole. Now, in the case of the military, you're doing the bidding for your government, and the people that hurt you are the people that are opposing your government. You can't send a bill to the enemy, so your own government has to pay the bill. Okay? Now, just in case you didn't know, there's two different principles that Veterans Affairs operates on. When you're at home, they use the compensation principle, and when you're in a special duty area, a war zone, they use the insurance principle. The insurance principle doesn't care whether you get hurt on or off duty. It only cares that did something happen. You could have a heart attack in a special duty area. You will get a pension or income replacement benefit or a disability or whatever the compensation that's being paid because you're in a special duty area or a war. You will get compensated for your injury. But if you're in Canada and you're not in a special duty area or a war, they used the compensation principle, which says you had to be on duty in order to get compensated for an injury. Okay. Was the 1997 report, Canadian Forces report, called Care of the Ill and Injured, trying to create confusion in an official government report about SISIP being insurance? Clearly so. And then I said ... The reason I say that is that, first of all, in the United States in the 1990s, there was reports that insurance companies had principles, policies, and they would say, you know, we want to confuse and refuse, delay and deny. So, in order to make money, they wanted the insured person to not understand anything. Okay? Now, in the 1997 report called, you know, Caring for the Ill and Injured, there was a point that they said many people believe in this myth that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan is an insurance policy. Well, what else is it? You pay premiums, you get insurance. And the government was sued under the Manulife case in a class action for breach of contract, a contract of insurance. But yet there was a government report that went on the record. Now, I don't have an official copy. All I have is a picture that Corporal Retired Tom Anderson was nice enough to send me. And I'd love to come across this report, and it was a preliminary report. But the thing is, they think that they put in an official report. The government's not supposed to lie, okay? Let me tell you something. In a democracy, the government is not supposed to lie. They are supposed to represent us. They might put spin on something. You know, they might not tell you the entire truth or something. But to say that there was a myth that the SISIP policy is insurance, that's so far out there, it's unreal. Because it looks like insurance, it smells like insurance, and it pays you monthly, and it cuts you off whenever it can, and it don't pay you whenever it can. So obviously it's insurance. Now, the fact of the matter is, they're not allowed to sell insurance. Remember the 2006 Fall Auditor General's report? Insurance is the property of the provinces. What the government should have done was purchase a policy from Manulife, and then Manulife would have taken the risk of profit or loss, and Manulife would have been the underwriter. But instead, they self-insure, and they say there's government-sponsored, you know, Treasury Board sponsored, and it's like a hot potato. There was a 2005 report put out by Veterans Affairs Canada. It's called, you know, they were looking at changing the system and getting rid of the pension. And they said in 1982, Treasury Board took over the SISIP policy. Now, I have seen in the Manulife case that the Chief of Defense Staff assumed effective control of SISIP on the 1st of March 1990. So the hot potato got sent back to the Chief of Defense Staff from Treasury Board after 8 years. Why was that? I suspect it's Financial Administration Act, Section 7.12. Now, sometime between 1990 and 2019, it went back to Treasury Board. We know that because, well, Manulife had to sue Her Majesty the Queen, you know, so it was transferred back to the government, DND, in 2019 on the 1st of April. So on the 1st of April, it went back to the military, but it's like nobody wants to handle it, you know, when the shit hits the fan. That's what I suspect is happening. Nobody wants to touch it. But you see, under the National Defense Act, the Financial Administration Act is not allowed to apply because of Section 41.3. So when they were saying that the Treasury Board was supposed to govern SISIP, well, it was illegal for them to govern it. It was illegal under two acts. It was illegal under the Financial Administration Act, but SISIP was actually created under the National Defense Act, Section 39.1. That's non-public property. Now, non-public property, unlike the military Min Law Manual states that non-public property is a special form of public property, go fuck yourself. Public property is just what it says, government money, taxes and things that it wants to do with what public property, it can do what it fucking wants. But non-public property under the National Defense Act is in Section 39(1), and it is not public property because you put the pronoun non, N-O-N, in front of public property, which means it's not public property. So it's not a special form of public property, you sons of bitches. It is the soldier's money. See? In fact, there's one part of it that says that the Chief of Defense Staff must act when he gets a specific direction from the contributor. I sent a registered mail to the Chief of Defense Staff in 2015, and I said, make the rate 85% instead of 75%. I said, stop clawbacks, and what else was it? Well, I said 85 instead of 75, but they made it 90 under the income replacement benefit in the 2016. So my suggestion was actually 5% what VAC, different from what VAC said. Anyway, moving on to my last point, because I don't want to be at this all day, especially where I'm feeling a bit off. In the United States recently, you might have saw on the news about this Roe versus Wade thing. So I said controversy about Roe versus Wade and abortion rights. Checks and balances on democratic power, which I spoke about earlier. Courts are supposed to be the check and balance against government power, but the justice is appointed by the sitting government. Sometimes the elected representative must provide a check and balance against the courts. It seems to me that the Americans get caught up in this legality, whether something is legal or not. And then they look at a precedent like Roe versus Wade, which is about abortion, and they said that it was legal for the past 50 years. Now that means people get used to it. Now people have challenged that case in the past and failed. So it stood up against challenges. Now the Republicans in the state stacked the Supreme Court when they had the chance, and they put judges there to overturn this case. But 80% of Americans, according to the polls, support the right to choose. Now, I don't care about abortion so much, you know, right or wrong, whatever. I mean, my aunt, she's a staunch pro-lifer, and I try to help her out with legal matters because they got in trouble a few years ago when Newfoundland put a 50-meter bubble around the abortion clinic, and I went to bat, tried to get them to fix it because, I mean, they were going to throw Granny in jail. Because you aren't allowed as a province to create criminal law. Criminal law has to be created by Ottawa under the Constitution. So you aren't allowed to throw people in jail for some kind of a minor regulatory offense like that. So I wasn't worried so much about about abortion per se. I was trying to say, listen, you stay in your own lane. If Newfoundland wants to make certain laws, it can under the Constitution. But if you want to make laws that are outside your jurisdiction, go fuck yourself. That's why we have a Constitution. Now, I spoke to someone in the Justice Department of Newfoundland, or maybe I spoke to the Justice Minister himself, and I told him about my concerns. He said, well, you know, this has been challenged up in BC, and it withstood the challenge. I said, yeah, I read that case. And it seemed like they were worried about this and that, and privacy, security of the person, but they never examined the criminality aspect. You know, it seemed to me that they were worried about certain aspects of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but they weren't looking at the criminal power, you know, being made by the provinces, because they cannot make criminal law. You have the Canadian Criminal Code, and then it's enforced by the provinces, because the provinces have the courts. But the actual law comes from Ottawa. Anyway, it never went, and I also had the misfortune, I guess, I had the affidavits and stuff filed by the manager or the director of the abortion clinic and stuff, and it seemed to me, from my reading of her request to the courts, that she was more concerned about making money and than the rights of, you know, her patients. And see, that rubbed me the wrong way. This lady who was running the clinic went to the government and got them to write a law because she wanted to make more money, not that she's concerned about the health and safety of the patients. I mean, it pisses me off to see that kind of shit. I mean, anyway, I mean, that's what I got from it, from reading the, the inside stuff from my aunt giving me the stuff that was filed when they had an injunction case. Anyway, the thing about Roe versus Wade, to me, is that if you think about the checks and balances I mentioned before, you have the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman, the Canadian Forces Ombudsman. They're fucking useless. You have the Veterans Review and Appeal Board. They're useless. Why are they useless? Well, they're part of the government. They used to be an independent commission up until 1995. Before that, you could say they're still part of the government, but they're part of a commission instead of being part of the executive branch. But in 1995, they said it'd be faster and cheaper if they brought it into the department, but they forgot about the principles of fundamental justice. Now, the opposition, back in 1995, brought up the very same point I'm making, and they said, this is unconstitutional. You can't just do that. You can't get rid of a justice system where you have an independent judge rule on the case of the veteran who was aggrieved that they had something denied. So you go to the commission before 1995, and then you could be assured of a fairly reasonable, independent answer. But when you make this part of the government, then you bring in the government's self-interest. The government wants to win appeals, so it brought the judges inside, its own organization. So basically, you're not supposed to judge anything that you have a stake in. You're supposed to have, everybody should know that, right? If you get accused of something, or if you want to have a fair trial on anything, you have to have three things: notice, an opportunity to be heard, and an independent judge. Now, under the new Veterans Charter, and I'll finish up with this, I think I've, said my piece and whatever. Under the new Veterans Charter, the pension for life, there is no appeal rights, even to that flawed Veterans Review and Appeal Board, for all of the parts like that, aside from the disability award, which is now called the Additional Pain and Suffering Compensation, that has normal VRAB appeal rights and Bureau of Pension Advocates assistance. But they were also brought in 1995, by the way. They used to be an independent commission, and then they got brought into VAC, so the same thing applies to the government lawyers who get paid by the government, but they're supposed to represent the veteran. And I have to say, if you're getting paid by the government to represent the veteran against the government, are they gonna really put their best foot forward when they're getting paid? They're gonna get a pension from the government. Tell me that that's not fucked up. So anyway, the thing is, what I was finished that thought before I go. If you are dissatisfied with some of the other things that they call a benefit, you cannot. You can do first level internal review that I call infernal review. Then if you don't like that answer, you can ask for a second level of infernal review, and then that's it. Now, a while ago, I came up with, well, you might be better off, instead of having that biased BPA lawyer represent you against a biased Veterans Review and Appeal Board, you could go to the courts, and hopefully you could be getting an independent judge. But that's pretty risky, because most people won't think of the fact that you can go to court, and a lot of people want to get a contingency fee from the lawyer, so you'd have to convince them to represent you for, say, 30% of your winnings. And they might be afraid of going against the government. I had a call I made to a large class action law firm. I never spoke to a lawyer, but the receptionist said they don't take cases against the government. Now, that's not very reassuring. If you have large companies, lawyers, they're in business, and they don't want to take on the government because the government has basically unlimited funds. So the government can drag out things forever and a day and try to wear you down, right? So the thing is that if I ever get this to the point where, we take them on and go to court, I hope to get what's called a summary judgment, right? I'm thinking about, asking them to, basically win right away. The other side doesn't have a case. They can't say, for example, that, they're allowed to claw back when they wrote laws to say that clawbacks were illegal. So they're breaking the very law that they wrote to say that you can't touch money that is being paid out of the government treasury. Now, it might be coming from the government treasury, but you have to look at why it's being paid. Now, I didn't mean to keep going, but I'll finish that point. Okay, let's say you served in the military for 20 years, 25 years. You got out healthy, you retired. You get in the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act payment pension paid in relation to the service and the contributions you made. You're not getting some benefit that you didn't pay for. You're getting property. That's the Clark versus Clark Supreme Court of Canada case in 1990. Because all pensions are property, and there was a case about the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act in 1990, so no one can argue that it's different for the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. It was said to be income at the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, and then it went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they overturned the previous court's decision that it was income. Now, that's very important for several things. It's very important for divorce, because that was what that case was about, okay? So it's also very important about clawbacks, because they claw back because they say it's income. But it's not income in the eyes of the law. According to the Supreme Court, it's property. So they claw back based on the fact that you get income from your pension when you in fact get your money back that you put away that they saved on your behalf. Because they are a fiduciary, because they took the money off your check when you earned it. They didn't give you all the money you earned. And then, after you retire, they give you the money that you put away in the bank many years ago. So in a way, it's sort of like interest. You get back more money than you put in. But I have been saying, and I'm dragging this out again, unfortunately, because I'm making it more complicated, you shouldn't have to pay at all. Your service ought to be good enough. IBM versus Waterman had a man who got unjustly dismissed, and they tried to argue that the damages for his unlawful dismissal should be mitigated by the pension that the company, IBM, paid 100% of the contributions for. The Supreme Court of Canada said that the contributions made on his behalf were his property. His time, his service had value. Instead of paying it to him, they put it in the bank for him. They said, therefore, the pension is property, the pension is non-indemnity and contributory, and therefore, you can't take it into account. Now, how come the government keeps saying, like Harper did in 2012, you guys are getting too good a deal? We put in $3.78 for every dollar you put in, so we're going to make it 50-50. Now, for people that are conditioned by the Canada Pension Plan, which is 50-50, but it's a multi-employer pension, as opposed to a single employer pension, Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, you don't need a contribution, according to the IBM case, and common sense, right? Basically what it is a pay cut, okay? Because if you have some of the money that you should have got paid, the government saves because it saves on its payroll costs. Instead of having a payroll cost that's higher because it paid you all of the money you earned, then it withholds that money. And up until the year 2000, they never put the money away. They only had a paper debt. Okay? So all of the money that they said they took off your check, they didn't take off your check prior to Bill C-78 in the year 2000. Okay? That was also the year they decoupled the federal pensions from the Canada Pension Plan. Now, you might be thinking, and unfortunately, I don't want to shut up, so I'm not going to say it, but the thing is they say that these pensions are linked, coupled, but the government did decoupling in 2000, right? So according to them, in 1966, the government decided to integrate all the federal pensions with the Canada Pension Plan, and your premiums are this and that and the other thing, and therefore we have these bridging parts of the acts, and we're going to reduce one pension because of another. Now, pensions being property, let's say you had two bank accounts. You put money in bank account A, you put money in bank account B. You go to take money out of bank account A, and they say, you got money in bank account B, so we're not going to give you all your money. Tell them to go fuck themselves. That's your property. See? So the government is getting away with this by trying to say to the public that the public has an interest in our pensions. It doesn't have any interest in our pensions. The pensions that are paid to public servants, RCMP, and the Canadian Forces, they are supposed to be an incentive to serving the public. Roy, Federal Court of Appeal, 2003. The judge said in that case that the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act is both a forced savings plan and an incentive for people to join the military. So it's already been to court 19 years ago. So we know that it's property from the 1990 case. We know that it's both property and a way to get people to join. But you see, that's always been known. Pensions have always been there because you earn all the money at the time you serve. You're whoever. Now you get most of the money to live on at the time you earned it. 2 weeks later or something. But they have delayed remuneration that is paid later, and that's to attract and retain good people. See? Private employers do it because the other people might go to another company. If they don't have a good pension plan, if they don't have good benefits, people will vote with their feet. So the government's sort of like that too. Because in a 1966 report I saw about recruitment and retention, it was talking about the military has people and it needs more technological people these days. It can't just hire, people without high school and everything. So there was 100,000 people that was being taken out of the general economy because they were serving in the military and defending us against the Russian threat. Back in the 60s even. So you got to think of the labor market, I guess. Anyway, I think that's enough because I only meant to be about a half hour today. And I hope this is fairly interesting. And if you got a stake in the game, if you have some of the stuff that I'm working on that you want to get fixed, of course it's more interesting. But I'm trying not to be too boring. But I also don't want to be, too flamboyant and whatever, because I'm kind of a deadpan person generally. Except when I get upset, with them bastards when they're stealing our money. But anyway, listen, you guys have a good weekend, and I'll be back next Thursday around the same time.